What's up, YouTube? I'm Andrew and this is 3DIY, the show where you come to watch me swear at computers, 3D printers, and my own two hands until I end up with something pretty cool. Today I'm going to be tackling a prop that I've wanted to have ever since I was a tiny child, Spider-Man's web shooters. I grew up a huge fan of Spider-Man. I have a Spider-Man tattoo on my forearm, and when I was like 7, I mailed hand-drawn Spider-Man comics to Marvel and asked for a job. I've always been fascinated by Spider-Man's homemade wrist-mounted web shooters. So when Scott Niswander over at Nerdsync announced that he was doing a month of web-related videos for Webruary, I knew this was the perfect time to finally get some childhood wish fulfillment going on and make the web shooters. Scott runs the channel Nerdsync, where he makes videos about science, philosophy, culture, history, and art, all through the lens of comics. Scott's going to be wearing these web shooters in his video about the original character who used web shooters long before Spider-Man. So if that interests you, you can watch that once you're done here. The link will be in the description. I had a few requirements for features I wanted to include in these web shooters. The web cartridges should be removable. I figured I would do that with magnets. I wanted to have a hinge and a clasp so they could open and close, otherwise I have no idea how the f you'd get them on. And I also wanted to include some parts made of the flexible Ninjaflex filament for comfort and to have the trigger be adjustable. I'll achieve that by putting some wire through the middle of that part. Once I had all my planning done, I opened Fusion 360, my new modeling software of choice, and started with a rough practice model to see what ideas would and wouldn't work. This model taught me that I'd have an awful fucking time making the web cartridges fit if it wasn't a perfect circle, so having it fit flush to the wrist was way out of my fucking league. I also didn't like how small this design looked, so I decided to make the whole thing a little bit longer for the final design. On the final model, I drew the cross-section of the various parts of the shooters around an approximate model of my wrist's dimensions, and used the revolve tool to make perfectly circular arm cuffs. I did the same for the inner cuffs, which I intended to print in Ninjaflex, and the web cartridges, which I only revolved 57 degrees, in order to nicely fit 6 of them around my wrist with a small 3-degree gap for style. Once I had all the rough shapes worked out, I added all the extra details that really make this design look real. I added piping, some beveled edges, and nozzle details where the cartridges would connect with the body of the web shooter. Well, I was feeling so detail-oriented, I added the nozzle where the webs would come out, and I went super close and added these little spinnerets like a real spider, a detail which I'm personally really happy with. Next was the trigger section. I made a long rectangle with some extra detail on top where the wire would go through. I left a space for the circular buttons in the rubber, since I wanted to print that part in plastic to match the body. Then I cut a hole out of the body and the Ninjaflex inner sleeve to leave room to glue the trigger in. Now all I have to do is cut the outer sleeve in half, add the hinges and the clasping mechanism, and we should be ready to print this shit out, provided I didn't fuck up the design in any way. 3D printing montage, go! The outer shell's mostly printed well on the first go. The cartridges, however, showed some horrible print lines the way I printed them sideways, so I reoriented them straight up, which worked really nicely to reduce those lines. So that's all the solid plastic parts printed now. Let's move on to the horrible horror of the Ninjaflex filament. To put it lightly, this is where shit went totally fucking sideways. First off, I started with this flexible filament from filaments.ca, a Canadian filament provider who I'd seen very few reviews for. Now this could be my fault for not storing it properly in the bag with the silica gel, but this filament, smoked as it went through my nozzle? To say the least, I found this disconcerting. I decided to try and print with it anyways. This was around 2 AM.
When it's after 2 AM, just go to sleep.
I know, shut up. So I tried to get this filament to print basically all night. I tried printing slowly, I tried adjusting the tension, I tried everything that I could find, scouring forums upon forums until sometime around 5 AM, after having dismantled my printhead for the 7 billionth time, breaking my fans with an Allen key in the process like a fucking sleep-deprived idiot, and just generally being way too tired and frustrated, I decided it was the filament's fault and ordered a roll of the good stuff, Ninjaflex brand filament, for next day delivery and promptly passed out. The next day, I thought I'd start off by printing the last few web cartridges, only to discover my printer suddenly not working. It would print for a little while and then jam and stop printing. It took me all day to figure out why, and I was fucking frustrated. At one point I think I even shed a manly tear. Anyway, it turns out that in my sleep-deprived state, I had installed the heat sinks backwards. So yeah, don't service your 3D printer unless you're properly rested. Lesson learned. Okay, I'm gonna move on to what I can work on without the Ninjaflex, the plastic body parts. I painstakingly removed all the stupid plastic support material, and sanded down all the parts to a point I was happy with. While I was sanding, one of the sleeves broke a bit, but I was easily able to patch it with a putty made of super glue and baby powder. I learned this trick from Bill Duran over at Punished Props, and it's been really effective for spot repairs. Thanks, Bill. Next, I painted all the parts with a black base coat, which will look really nice under this metallic silvery paint. After everything was dried, I added a weathered effect to make the details pop. This was as simple as watering down some black acrylic paint, painting it into the crevices, and wiping away the excess with a paper towel. I added some lighter paint to some of the high points on the web cartridges to make them pop a little bit more. I'll just take these outside into the cold and spray them with a clear coat to protect the paint, and we'll be done with them for now. Okay, now the moment of truth. Trying to print with the brand name Ninjaflex. This stuff immediately worked much better than the filaments.ca stuff, and it didn't appear to combust, which is a nice bonus. It took some fiddling to dial the settings in for the Ninjaflex, but once I got it going slow enough, it would print very nicely, provided I hang the filament above the printer. And unspool some filament because my printer couldn't tug on the flexible filament hard enough to turn the spool. This actually caused some problems because unspooling the filament made it way more likely to tangle and thus causing the print to fail. Because of this, I ended up with a good chunk of the inner sleeves printed out, but like just the bottom part. So I decided the best thing to do would be to just print the top ring on its own and fill the middle portion with some craft foam instead of Ninjaflex. The smaller Ninjaflex part printed a lot more easily since they didn't take as long, and all I had to do was unspool the filament a bit every 40 minutes or so. Now that I have all the parts, I can finally assemble the web shooters. First, I glued in all the magnets. For the hinge pins, I used some nails which I cut down to fit the hinges, and added a dot of hot glue to keep them in place. For the flexible trigger, I cut a length of wire, doubled it up for extra thickness, and ran it into the hole in the trigger line, leaving it flexible and bendy. Then I simply glued it into the body. Next, I glued in the Ninjaflex rings, which I had to cut down to fit the craft foam in the center. I ended up also cutting the rings of Ninjaflex at the hinge, since they weren't flexible enough to open properly. I'll update that in the model for the next time I print. Now all that's left is to measure the inside for the craft foam. I made a trapezoid of foam and traced that to create 31 more, 32 in total. I doubled up the foam shapes for thickness, and then glued them into the inside of the cuffs. And that's it! The Spider-Man web shooters are done and ready to send out to Scott. I really couldn't be happier with how these web shooters turned out. The magnetic web cartridges are super satisfying to remove and put back in, and they're actually decently comfortable to wear. I think I've successfully blown my 7-year-old self's mind. Don't forget to go check out Nerdsync to see Scott's awesome video featuring these web shooters. And if you do, let him know Andrew sent you. The link is in the description. If you want to grab yourself a pair of these web shooters, or any number of other 3DIY creations, check out our Etsy shop. And you can use the coupon code YouTube10 for 10% off. The link is also in the description. Thanks for watching this episode of 3DIY. Don't forget to click that like button if you liked it. Click or tap on the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you want to support the show and download the models I make here to print for yourself, head over to our Patreon.